Thanks very much. This is one of my favorite verses. Many of you know Karen. She can't be here today. She's still working, but she sends her love. One of my favorite verses, because there are some verses that sort of keep coming up on the journey. In a way, this is very much a bit about my journey. I'm not going to say much about the police as it happens. But if I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. And one of the places that has taken, maybe it's the switch on the machine. One of the places that has taken me is Alaska. Some people wonder where Alaska is. Ken, obviously not, geographer and the rest of it. The bit on the right of the screen is Canada, and Alaska is to the left, the west of that. I believe it was first bought by America in the 1800s, but didn't become a state of the United States until 1959. Bought from the Russians. Many of you this might be an image that pops up in your mind when you talk about and you think about Alaska. This is the Denali National Wildlife Reserve. 21,000-foot mountain, I think, Denali, isn't it? Where's Ken gone? He's gone. Something like that. Okay, so also in Alaska, but 400 miles to the west of Anchorage and 400 miles to the west of Denali, there is this place called Kako. It is 400 miles also from the nearest connecting road, which, as you can imagine, if you want to set up a mission or do anything, live in a place like that, that provides a few challenges. Here is the center itself. It's not very big, surrounded by forest, and even more surrounded by mosquitoes in the summer. What are the ways of getting in there? Well, it's right on the Yukon River. It's actually at the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta, flowing out to the sea in the west. So one way of getting there is by river. This is a barge. Twice a year, a barge comes up from the sea, up the Kuskokwim to the Yukon. And for instance, if you are running a mission or running a center like this, it's going to deliver probably 100,000 gallons of aviation fuel, diesel, and just about everything you could possibly want in your tuck shop for the coming year. The other way to get there is like this. I want to say that sound at the end there wasn't the thing ripping its undercarriage off. That's what it sounds like on a rough airstrip like that. So that aircraft I've been associated with now since 2004. I've been to Kako about 13 times, I think, in all. We didn't go this year. But Kako for me has always seemed like, if there was one message that I associate with Kako, it's a beacon of light in a dark place. So here we are, a bit more geography, just Anchorage down the bottom right-hand side there, where one flies into, probably up from Seattle, from the west coast. A few years, Iceland Air were doing a fantastic flight from Keflavik direct to Anchorage, which saved about 4 hours of overall flying time. Otherwise, it can take about 18 hours for us to get there by air. Then we've got to get on a jet to that place called Bethel, which is the bottom left-hand, sort of 7 o'clock position, 8 o'clock position. And that's the 400 miles from Anchorage to Bethel. And then we've got to get on that yellow thing, probably, and for about a 40-minute flight up to Kako. So this is western Alaska. We're about 150 miles from the western coast there. And if I get my navigation wrong, and also somehow miraculously have enough fuel, when I get to the coast, if I forget to land or something, I'll be in Russia in about an hour and a half, 2 hours. There are many extraordinary people in the world, and it's right sometimes to single some people out and say, wow, wow. This is a guy called Dave Penns, who knew that area in the 50s and had a massive heart for bringing the gospel and bringing care to people who didn't know it. He was drawn and called to this part of Western Alaska, and he found an old gold mine. And he decided this would be a great place to run a year-round operation and mission, but also with summer camps, which are massive, very big events really in America, Camp America, things like that, and in Alaska too. So he set Kako up. And he picked me up one day in 2004 from Bethel in that yellow aircraft, Papa. And we'd been flying for about half an hour, and that was the view down, mainly, or a bit of that as well. And I said to him, Dave, what's down there? We're at 500 feet, so you can kind of see what's down there, but it's like, what is down there? I don't know. And he said, there's nothing down there but bears and wolves. And generally speaking, I think he's that's proved right. It's not a place that I would want to have an off-airport landing in a fixed-gear aircraft, which these are. I would love to fly floats. It'd be fantastic if Kako had a float plane. But fixed-gear-wise, you're in trouble if you have an engine problem or you have to land off an airport or an airfield. Because the terrain is so rough. It's tundra, largely, or the other 90% is water. Which always makes me grateful, really does, when I see the power of prayer, because many times over these years, 13 years, folks in St. Paul's have supported us in different ways, including praying for my part and the other pilot's part and the overall safety of the camp. But every time I take off from Kako, I'm thinking I am being held on your prayers, for those of you who've done that. And I would encourage you, if you know other people are doing things in perhaps risky jobs, risky missions and things too. Somebody says, could you pray for us? Try to remember to pray, because for some reason God has chosen to answer and help us through the prayers of his children. So that's you and me. Let's do it for each other. So this guy on the right here is Dave Penn's son, who now runs the outfit. Dave passed away a few years ago. And this is Jonathan. He's doing what he has to do, which is checking the voltage regulator on my aircraft, because there's usually something wrong at some point in the few weeks that I'm out there. Just because because aircraft have technical issues, same as one's cars do. Perhaps not. Perhaps cars don't quite as much this time of over here, but aircraft still do. So he's checking the voltage regulator. It had a very spurious kind of warning or indication inside the cockpit. So Jonathan now runs the center. He took over from his dad. He used to be, before he came back to the center to run it, he worked in the Antarctic on big machinery, doing, I don't know what, oil refinery stuff, I think. So he's a mechanic that knows his way around small things like voltage regulators in Cessna 206, and also massive sort of JCB type bits of kit. This guy on the left here also was a very big part of Kako, or still is, but with Dave. He's a native Alaskan who now ministers actually just 20 miles to the west in a village. But for many years he was actually based in Kako with Dave, because clearly when one's doing mission among a predominantly Inuit, Eskimo, Athabascan Indian population, it should be done by those people themselves as much as possible. So he's a guy I'd still see every year when I go back in sometimes, and fantastic Vietnam vet. Great story to go with him as well. This guy helped out for a while as well. It does attract people to come and help out for a while, and one of the sort of pangs that I've had many times knowing about Kako is that it's such a brutal environment. Minus 40 in winter, 9 feet of snow. Your entire life is about cutting larch trees down so that they can be burnt in the fires at the bottom of the houses, so the ice and permafrost does not crush all the basements and things in the houses. So people like this come along and they do a bit of really, really hard work for a few years. But it's very difficult for people to stay there really long term. It's an incredible calling. So he's a good guy. And, you know, what is the overall mission of Kako? We talked a little bit about it. The overall mission, well, obviously the Great Commission. Go into all the nations, baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Just like that first verse, I will be with you. He is with us. He's with you. Secondary part of the mission, because of the social nature of that part of the world, Alaska has the highest suicide rate of anywhere in the United States and in many other places in the world too. And one of the missions there is to provide a retreat and some counseling services over the years into local villages, but also in the center itself, with a direct emphasis on suicide prevention. And that's largely among young people as well as adults. So little villages probably don't look much bigger than that. That's the strut of the aircraft on the right there, but you know, the picture spans the village there, and this is about 1,000 feet, perhaps 800 feet above this little village, which is down near Bethel, actually, on the Yukon. And you can see they're not very big, perhaps 400 or 500 people in the village, most of them. Now, my own journey, how did I get to be in a wild place like that? Well, it starts back in 1993 now, when St. Paul sent me and Karen to do a whole load of training and then end up in Tanzania. Flying a 206. This is 1996 on some dirt strip in Tanzania. And I checked my logbook, actually. This aircraft, I last flew that in February 1998. But this is a more recent picture, actually. Incredible. It's still, you can do incredible things with aircraft and, you know, just keeping them going, putting new engines in every 2,000 hours. It's not like our cars. So they're really well looked after a lot of the time. And here is, yeah, what I used to call the banana bird, Kuwait Papa. I'm quite glad it's yellow, actually, because it means if they do have an engine failure or somebody has an engine failure or some problem that means they have to do a forced landing, the chances are you're going to get seen a bit better than in sort of a black-coloured aircraft or some other general colours that they use. So I've always been quite happy about that. It's a bit of search and rescue kind of mentality. So on the journey, just like on your journey, there are people who journey with us, aren't there, that we're grateful for. And just 2 years ago, I bumped into these two. On the left is Derek, and on the right is Bill. Just spent a week there after 3 weeks that I was there. And Derek had just finished with the US Air Force, and Bill was brought up as became a missionary in Zambia. And they just happened to be there for a week. And I've often found that the people who perhaps are there on the same weeks, or maybe there's a bit of a week overlap if I'm there for 2 or 3 weeks. They have an impact on lives, just like anybody in your journey has an impact with you. The people that you journey with, sometimes they're brought in, aren't they, just for a very small season, and then we move apart for various reasons. But I'm sure you can think of people that have been with you for some time. They were really important. God brought them into your life for a while. And then, you know, we have to go our separate ways sometimes. Well, I caught up with these guys recently, actually, because we're not going to let them get away for it, recently for a 3-hour Zoom call, which is quite challenging. And it's, one of them lives in the east coast of the States and the other somewhere else in the States, west coast. So, but they're good people. One of the purposes I found, apart from just flying in people, flying in resources, flying in, or flying out people to go for medical treatment, whatever it is training other people. Some of you know that I'm a professional flight instructor here in the UK, and I found in the last sort of 5 years there's been more need, more opportunity to train other people who are there as pilots at the same time as I'm there. So this good guy called Adrian, young lad of 20, he was there, I think, he'd probably correct me now when he sees this, but 4 years ago, I think, was the first time we bumped into each other. And it was a privilege to think, actually, I'm using all of my MAF experience, even though that was many years ago, all of my knowledge of Kako and flying in Alaska, to hopefully have some kind of input that helped him. You'd have to ask him whether he agrees with that or not, but there are insurance requirements that you can't just jump into that 206 and fly it, so you have to have some training, but also a certain number of hours. 22-year-old, I think, and he already had an American commercial pilot's license. So basically my role was to train him on everything about this airstrip at Kako, everything about the local area, and that includes how to get in and out in bad weather. We'll always have limits. There's always going to be limits. But, you know, I was used to, in MAF, flying and pushing, not pushing certain limits, but just discovering that you can actually just extend some limits a little bit once you're more comfortable and competent. It's about competency and extending your competency. And certainly in Kako, I found over the years even more challenge to that, because quite often, well, this amount of water around, you remember from some of the other slides, you know, you're going to get a lot of moisture, a lot of low-level fog and mist and just claggy stuff with a cloud base perhaps down to 400 feet or less. If it is, we don't go. But half the time you don't know, because of the situation at Kako, you don't know what the weather is half an hour out. You don't even know if you can get out into the river and across the river where a lot of basically low-lying sea level tundra is. That's fine if you can get there, because the chances are you can be ducked under cloud base or you can find your way around obstructions. So one of my main efforts really in training people is about how to work with the weather to be safe, and to be safe, and to be safe. And we're all different, every pilot's different, and come at it from different places, so different levels of experience. But it is quite a dangerous place to fly in some ways if you're not careful. You only need one bit of complacency on one moment, on one flight, and things can turn very, very challenging. Fueling on these aircraft, you do it on the wings, on the top there. It's a bit like Tanzania, actually, in 1996, where we would have to get on the top of the wing if we're not at our home base with 20-litre jerry cans, and put like a Halford's, one of those things, you know, the things you wring out when you're washing your car. What are they called? Yeah, they're like cloths, aren't they? You wring them out. I'll remember what they are in a minute. Putting those inside the fuel funnel and then using your jerry cans. Well, this is not quite so bad because there is a tank, just what we're going to see in a minute, for refueling. But it does remind me a bit of 1996 Tanzania, getting up on the wing and trying to balance a 20-litre thing as well whilst climbing up there, hoping not to fall off, of course. Here's the inside of Cessna 206. Pretty standard instrument kit. This year, actually, there were more things in the instrument panel than ever before. I always think every year I go there, there's more and more holes in the instrument panel where something isn't working, has been taken out. But the FAA, at least, will be pleased to know that there's a fully working minimum standard kit in this aircraft. Who are some of the people who go to help at a place like this. It needs a lot of help. Who are some of the people? Well, perhaps in their early 20s, American sort of college types. And, you know, I always feel that we're also on the journey for those few weeks. And it sometimes can be a significant part of our journey for me and maybe for other people. And there's a presentation I did to this poor unsuspecting lot last year, which is called Fear, Faith, Courage, and Failure. And I think if I wanted to do a presentation about my life, I think they would be the things that I would focus on. Fear, faith, courage, and failure. It's a privilege to walk alongside these folks as they minister to the youth who come in for 6 weeks in the summer. What Kako does is a sort of youth-focused ministry in the summer. And these folks do ministry. They proclaim the gospel, they do a bit of support, and they have a lot of fun, just like in any other youth ministry. Karen's been out there with me a couple of times, which is lovely to do things together. She hates guns, and it's absolutely essential if you walk anywhere down the airstrip into the bush here that you take some sort of weapon with you. It might be a bear spray, actually, but it's essential you do. But I've taken it out, a slide that showed the first year she was there, and we walked 6 miles down the river, right in close bush, with her, well, at least showing her how to use a rifle. Our oldest son, who's in the military, actually did a very patient job of showing his mum how to use a rifle in case we needed it. And actually at the training session, I realized we hadn't even talked about sort of command and control. What happens if a bear or a wolf does come out of this close jungle to us? We hadn't even talked about that. We're just trying to get Karen to use a rifle. So she's fantastic at lots of things. I don't think she ever thought she'd be doing that. That's all of us 1 year. Luke on the right and Ben on the left. There he is as well. Using somebody else's rifle. Here's Ben. First sight of what people use to get around on these camps and in the villages, quad bikes. Here's a pilot, fabulous guy who was there for a week when I was there, and he does things really properly. So he's actually weighing the luggage. I'm fairly adept at picking a case up and saying, yeah, that's 8 kilos, or that's 12. But, you know, fair play to this guy. You're doing it the right way, mate. Carry on. So on the right of these two is a chap from a village who's a village leader. Quite often, part of the job will be to pick a village leader up or bring somebody in who's got a particular relationship with the centre, maybe with Jonathan or perhaps previously with Dave, his dad. So we quite often fly people in and out or take them from place to place, perhaps. It's all part of the ministry and part of the enrichment of that mission as well. If you like driving diggers, anybody here a digger driver? Probably not. There's a role for you in Kako as well. There's a role for everybody actually in Kako. But if you happen to drive one of these things, even better. And yes, that man is standing in the bucket on the front of it. I don't know what the health and safety rules are. Who's a health and safety expert? Health and safety in the UK. Would you find somebody standing in the bucket? I mean, are they supposed to be in the bucket? No, I see some shaking heads. All right, I don't think they were either. But this is Western Alaska. Some things, you know, the limits get pushed a bit. And this is a church team. One thing the Americans are fantastic at is if there's a problem, or maybe it's a set piece requirement in a few months' time, but if there's a problem, this team were called out because there'd been the rivers had flooded down through the camp, washed away a bridge. And these folks were just like an instant pop-up church team who came out to help. They've got certain skills in housing and renovating and doing sort of hardcore things like that, but also softer stuff with decorating and just being with people as well. And so the centre does need people to come in and do this. Sometimes I've often thought, you know, I'm intrigued with the idea of like St. Paul's. I wonder if we could get a team to go over there some time. Because you don't have to be a JCB driver to be of real use in his service in a place like that. You can just be you. The back of the 206 can look like it's a 6-seat aircraft, but when everybody brings a whole load of luggage and things that you weren't expecting, it has to sort of go places in the aircraft. So all tied down studiously is what I do with them, just like my MAF training taught me to do, because if anything, if you do have a bit of a sudden stop at the end, shall we call it that, you don't want stuff joining you in your seat from 3 rows back. I once had a massive problem in Tanzania with 4 Maasai warriors who weren't really supposed to be the people I was flying, as far as I could tell. Something had got lost in the message over the crackling high-frequency radio. And instead of somebody who was having a lady who needed to go to hospital, a local hospital, I found 4 Maasai warriors, and they were resplendent with their 7-foot-long spears. Now, because I thought it was somebody who needed to go to hospital or a stretcher case, I'd taken 4 of the seats out. 4 of the seats out. The 2 front ones were the only ones left. And because we had these fantastic, they're not blow-up, they're vacuum stretchers. You put somebody on the bit of material, operate the vacuum mechanism, and it tightens around them. And it means they're rigid then, you can just pick them up and move them. Brilliant bit of kit. Would be a brilliant bit of kit if you had somebody to put on them. But when it's 4 Maasai warriors, they're all standing up. Now the problem was, I spoke a little bit of Swahili. That's not, well, it was a problem for most people. Spoke a bit of Swahili, but the Maasai did not speak any Swahili. And they certainly didn't speak English. So I had this problem like, what do I do? These are people. Should I wait for somebody else? We were right. As usual, there's always, when things are tricky, there's like a number of factors, aren't there? So right up against time, really up against time, because the sunset, last landing time, has to be adhered to in Tanzania, because there's only 15 minutes between the sunset and lights out, and we didn't fly at night. So I decided that I'd better get these guys in anyway. But what do I do about their spears? Well, they wouldn't fit in the cargo pod underneath, as I discovered. I was hoping they were going to fit in there. They don't. Learned that one. So they had to come in the cockpit with us, in the cabin with us. But the interesting thing was the first guy in sat in the seat, the one remaining seat in the back. He got in and sat facing backwards. And I realized that he's possibly never seen a seat before. It's not in his worldview. Probably hasn't seen an aircraft before, I don't know. So I managed to get him turned around the right way. But that kind of struck me as, we all see things differently, don't we, in our lives and on our journeys. We can interpret things in one way or another, as we choose to do. And sometimes we interpret them because of the way we're configured. And anyway, we won't tell, the rest of the flight was uneventful. Somehow I got them in, even though there were no seats. This is not in Kako, not in Alaska, it's in Tanzania many, many, many years ago. What are some of the risks out there? This thing says, this notice just in one of the local villages says, travel beyond this point is not recommended. If you must use this road, expect extreme cold and heavy, by the way, road, I think is a distinct. If you must use this track, expect extreme cold, heavy snow, carry cold weather, survival gear, tell someone where you're going. It really says a lot about the place. Mainly in winter, of course. But when I first went there, it was a requirement, state law, that you carried a firearm in the aircraft with you. So there used to be a firearm in the aircraft that I could have used. That's to defend yourself against marauding animals if you have a forced landing. But it's a pretty rough place, wild place. Things go wrong. This is a guy I got to know who literally saved my starter motor in the 206 last year. It just happened in the only place that day when I'd done 7, 8, or 9 other little tiny strips. This is the only place that the starter motor then decided to completely fail, was at Bethel, which is the slightly bigger airport where you fly into from Anchorage, so it takes jets and things. And so it has maintenance facilities there. And now the aircraft, and I believe this is how I see that first verse playing out sometimes with God on the journey with us, is that it happened there and not in one of the other strips. And there was a guy there who could fix it. One of the other things at Kako, there is permafrost and a runway, if you can call it a runway. This stuff is actually very, very soft. If I was to put my feet on it, we'd go in, it's spongy, and that means if you're with a 1,700 kilogram aircraft, too slowly you're going over it, you will sink in one wheel or another, and it will carry on sinking. I always thought, that's why we mark them at Kako with cones, and I always thought, well, that's a bit of a, I'm never going to do that really, until the one day I got distracted with a moose. I'd landed, we're still in the landing rollout, and I'm distracted by a moose off to the right, trying to show it to somebody, and the aircraft slowed too much over one of these patches, and the left-hand main gear went into it. Turned the engine off before the propeller got trashed, but the aircraft started sinking, so we needed a very quick rescue mission. One of the other things is that, you've got to store your aviation fuel somewhere, and it's a pretty good system. You'll probably quite correctly identify a car battery down there in the bottom right-hand side of the talking some of the risks. Sometimes have to move aviation fuel around in things like this. There's also wildlife. This is actually a bear print. You go too far without a bear spray, let's say something like that, which is the legal way of dealing with it, you're in trouble, really. The dog on the left was eaten by wolves a few years ago, sadly. That's the risks that they face, but they're an essential part of the center. This is a wolf dog, which are, cross between wolves and dogs, chained up in a little local village, extremely aggressive, showing far too much interest in me. Can you look at that, see that look in the eyes? I got as far away as possible from this. The other issues we talked about before is the weather. Can you see anything out the front to be safe? Now, I'm a fully instrument-rated pilot, but you can't, it would be possible to fly on instruments in this, but the cloud base is often so low that you couldn't actually do an instrument approach into wherever you're going, certainly in the country villages. So this kind of misty stuff is horrific for flying, and then you have to learn how to deal with it and adhere to those minimums. Mosquitoes everywhere, so you never go anywhere without a head net. And the young man in the center of the photo there is a guy called Kyle. We always remember Kyle with respect. He was a great hope, and his wife Ella, as people to really live. They wanted to live in Kako for a long time and minister to the local villages and the local people. They moved up there, and within a couple of months he was killed flying an aircraft just down the road from Kako. So rest in peace, my friend. Sometimes laugh at people and say if I write a book it will be called Stuff Happens, because it does. And yet I found on the journey it's possible to hold to faith, 100% faith, whilst knowing that stuff happens around you. And we don't always know what's over the horizon or around the corner. But we do know who's over the horizon, and we do know who's on that bend, further around the bend than we can see, but he will be with us, don't we? So as you can see, there's not much of wingspan left when you get to the trees. There is a bit actually, but there's crosswinds there which make it really quite challenging. And it's good. It makes you have to use lots of different techniques that I don't generally have to teach people in this country when I'm teaching them their commercial license. Some of the risks, the sort of places we're operating into, take you over water quite a lot of the time. Hello. if we have an engine failure at this point, it's a really bad day. And I mean that seriously in a way. It's just, again, I come back to this point. When I do this thing, when folks like yourselves are praying, remember to pray. I know I'm standing on the prayers of those and the strength of his sustaining hand to probably make sure those things don't go wrong. Village life, we're going to finish in a second here. So village life, small villages. This is Russian Mission, nearest one, 6 miles down the river, actually where the airstrip was that we just were about to land in there. And, it has a school, post office. I think it's probably about 1,000 people in Russian Mission. Another one further down near Bethel on the cusp of Krim. This is a typical sort of size of a village. Post office, here's your post office, where Amazon will get delivered to and everything. Got to go and pick it up, though, because it's 6 miles down the road. And there's no way of doing that unless you've got an aircraft or a boat or a quad bike, if you've got the fuel for it. In the villages, this typical kind of housing, in Russian Mission, I think this is. And a way of getting around in the winter is not quad bike, but snow machine. There's a house that my very first time I went to Kako, that doorway had a wolf pelt, 7 foot long stretched wolf pelt hanging up in the door, which kind of greeted me as my first year there, thinking, this is what it's about, Trevor. This is what it's about. You better be careful. MAF used to teach us a fantastic thing, which is, if you're going to go and do something, maybe an airfield you haven't been in or an area you hadn't been in recently, they always had this phrase, remember, you're in somebody else's woods. And I think for the last 12 times I've been to Kako, every time I go there, I remind myself I'm in somebody else's woods. I mean, literally, as well as be careful. Here's a guy who loves sending his late teenage grandchildren to Kako to hear the word of God, to hear the message, to have a great time. And there are people who are passionate for the next generation to know the same faith, the same Lord that you and I do here. Here's a bear pelt hanging up on the barbecue, I think, something like that. Another guy, I won't dwell too much, but a village leader in another village who I was flying so that he could go to, I think he was going to a funeral at the time. On the left, you see a lady who, I flew her back from a funeral. And kind of what I think is an extraordinary thing happened. She was sitting up front with me, it's about a half an hour back to her village, and we were talking about the loss that she'd suffered. And at that point, I think it was a bald eagle, flew across us and sort of dived down towards the aircraft, disappeared underneath us like that. And she said, I think it was her grandson who'd died. That is a sign to say that he's in a good place. For her, it was a massively powerful experience. 30 years ago, I might have said, okay, well, I'm not sure about some things other than Christian faith and the idea of what the spirit world is. Now I'm a complete believer in, we operate in a world that we don't know everything about. And that was quite a moment, because she believes that was the spirit of her grandson. And it was sent as a sign that he was okay. Take that as you will. We'll just move on there. So I think we've kind of out of time now, Ken. Are we? 5 minutes. Wait, excellent. Bonus. Some of the activities, a bit of shooting that the youth do in the summer when they come in, abseiling off the abseiling tower, and canoeing, and going down to the river, 6 miles to the river, minding the mosquitoes, but having a campfire and stuff like that out. Those of you who know me know that drumming and percussion is part of my life. But in places like this, one has to adapt and overcome. So these are fuel containers and a water container that have been pressed into service as percussion. It's amazing what sounds you can get out of these things when you really try, or when you really have to. Yeah, logistics-wise, the place has got to be stocked. Things can only come in by air or the river, the barge. This is how to get everything that you need for your camp kitchen that week into your aircraft. And there'll be no seats in this one. This is a cargo-only flight, or maybe your Amazon boxes and other boxes full of baked beans and whatever it might be. They have more than one aircraft there. This is a Cessna 182, 4-seat version of the 206. Fish is massive, salmon, as you can imagine, staple part of the diet. And that's what it might look like on your plate in the morning. That is actually moose gravy. And I've put some, egg stuff and things on it. Beautiful, actually. Lovely. For those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. The two verses, one at the beginning, one now, that sustained Karen and I on our journey. And just last week, came to the end of 3 years working at a flight training school. And I went and sat by, it's right on the sea on the south coast. I went and sat, as I sometimes do, literally on the beach for 10 minutes before I went into the workplace, my last ever day after 3 years. And it wasn't an eagle, but I've never seen before in the 3 years I've been there. I've never seen a kestrel that's just over my head, about 6 feet over my head. And it wouldn't go away. I was walking up and down the grass sort of area there by the beach, and it just followed me over my head. There was like a 20-knot wind blowing, breeze blowing off the Solent. And I don't care what anybody says, not what you lot, but other people would say, oh, it's just a coincidence. So I don't think it was, because I know how powerful this verse is. And birds of prey and eagles and birds of prey. It was a sign to me that, because I didn't know what I was moving on to next in work, it was a sign to me that he is with me. And he's ahead in the next piece. And I immediately thought of this verse. And thank you, Lord, for that.
Andy, thanks so much for that. Having flown in a Cessna 1,000 miles in Zambia this year, I can identify with all of that stuff. We'll have some questions. We've got just 10 minutes for questions. Can we start with a question? You mentioned the suicide rate and the needs in those villages, the Inuit and the other groups.
Yeah.
Could you summarize what their general condition is and what their lifestyle is like and so on?
So lifestyle is generally subsistence, hunting, and fishing. So summertime, they'll just be finishing their fish camps now on the river. They kind of move out in the villages. Some people move out in the villages and will be fishing and a bit of hunting. Moose is a very important staple diet. They're allowed to hunt at certain times, so they'll be stocking up their freezers with moose. What's the condition? Yeah, I mean, they're wonderful people. Different people groups there, different people groups mixed around with each other. But wonderful people, passion, they really know how to survive. They are survivors. It can teach most of us a lot about actual resilience, I think, in life. There are some social problems, just like there are here in Cheam and wherever. But generally very strong people. But they're battling with and struggling to deal with this endemic suicide problem.
So is it a society without hope?
I used to feel when I first went there that this was a place, it seemed to be like no other place I've been in on earth, which felt like there wasn't as much hope as there is in some other places. It felt like there was less hope. That's my personal feeling. And I think that does that does kind of hold, actually. I think there is a sense of what's it all about in very hostile, sometimes very hostile weather and conditions, and the resilience required to live. So I think, yeah, hope is a good way of summing it up, and perhaps could do with some more.
Any questions? Marguerite.
Thank you for that, Andy. You mentioned a retreat. Presumably, you're bringing in stuff for people who run a retreat. Can you tell us
Sorry,
something?
I'm just going to come over here. Yeah, that's it.
You mentioned the retreat.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about the retreat?
So the retreat is, in a sense, the summer stuff that I've been talking about, part of it.
Sure.
Move back into here, yeah. So the retreat itself is really everything that the centre does. So the youth camps in the summer, Jonathan now will, sometimes people will come in here from the villages who perhaps need to escape alcohol addiction and destructive patterns of behaviour and things, and they'll work in the centre, so as a retreat away from this kind of stuff. So it forms part of everything that the centre does.
Jean.
Can you tell us what are you going to be doing next? You're not going to retire, are you? You can't possibly.
Not going to retire, yeah. Ask Karen if she thinks I should retire or not. What's next? Well, this year Kako didn't happen in the summer. They've had a furlough. They've had time they really need to work on the actual resources there and things. So it wasn't part of it. I'm very much minded that the last time I went there, I think the Lord really spoke to me about, you have to be so much at the top of your game to fly out there. Not bigging it up, but you really do have to be. And currently, 3 days a week I'm flying aircraft. Can't believe I'm lucky enough to do it, but it's keeping my skills, somewhere up here. But Kako is completely different. Flying in Western Alaska is different. So last time I was there, I found I had probably could do with half of my time ministry to the helpers who come in. Because, I've always felt, well, look, we're all here together. You've come in from life, your lives of faith, but with challenges and maybe issues from that life. And we can talk about them, because who am I? I'm like some bloke from outer space to a certain extent, but it means people can talk. So I found myself having a ministry of being able to talk to people, and I think there'll be much, if I go back to Kako, there'll be much more of that, and less of the 9 flying hours days. And 9 flying hour days means you start at 8 a.m. and you really don't finish probably to midnight. It's a it's a very large workload. And I think at 64, I need to be careful I don't walk into too many more 9-hour flying days, only because you get fatigue is a big factor in accidents and not being at the top of your game. So I felt last time it's very much more cool probably to do ministries partly and then partly flying. Perhaps if there's somebody else needs training, I can jump in and train them or have a little program, as well as doing a bit of the staff flying. So yeah.
I think those who know any geography, of course, will know that the number of the hours of daylight in high summer in Alaska, 20 hours of daylight?
It's not unusual, and it's a really weird experience actually. It's not unusual to find yourself flying at midnight or 1 a.m. There is still light. There's light to fly, light to land with, but actually Kako, where it is, to land in the main direction you land in, which is the opposite one to the one we just saw actually, to land in that direction, if the sun is still above the ridge, which is 1,500 feet above it, if the sun is still above it, which it is between 8 p.m. and about 10 p.m., once it dips below that ridge, you can happily shoot and approach into land there, because there's generally, especially if you've got weight on board, there's no go around. So it has to be perfect. There is no climbing up because of the hills. So the sun is a big factor. So sometimes if we haven't managed to get back by 8:30, have to go to Russian mission where the sun isn't an issue and sit there for 2-3 hours or go and visit people, and then fly back in late at night. Night being the not night. So yeah, often see professional geographers and people like Ken and the rest of it, if you've been with me on a camping trip down the river, one of the first years I was there, and it was fantastic. We went down and we fished, we got loads of pike, set a fire going on the beach, started eating the stuff, and the sun went down about, 2:30, let's say over there. And I'm expecting it to come up over here, right? Well, it didn't. About an hour later, about an hour later or an hour and a half, it comes up over here. No, I didn't understand what was going on.
In fact, in the midnight sun, it goes round the horizon like that.
There you go. Yeah.
If you want a diagram at lunchtime, get a scrap paper there and I'll draw it for you. Explain how it works. One other question, Pam.
Thanks. Two quick questions, Andy. First of all, what happens to the waste produced by Kako? Does it have to be flown out? And my second question is, if you encounter a bear, what do you do? Run very fast, or?
I'll deal with the second one first. It hasn't happened to me, so I believe it does depend on what bear it is. But I think the thing is just stay still and make yourself as big as possible and make as much noise as possible. So an air horn or a bear spray, which is like pepper spray for bears, will work, but make yourself as big. If this happens to you, the next few weeks, remember I said this. Remember I also said, I think that's what you do. Probably instinct would make me turn on my heels and leg it, but then I'd almost certainly get eaten by a bear. Waste, a really good point. In a remote area like this, what do you do with, there's no green bin sitting outside the front door for recycling. So one of the things that has to happen is that certainly the food waste all has to go down about a mile down the runway off into the old mine site, so that bears and other things are not attracted into camp too much. But recycling is, there's a lot less reusing and making better and mending and using for extraordinary lengths of time the materials and equipment that are out there. It's, recycling is a concept that applies to some things, of course, but everything that can be recycled properly, the cardboards and things, great. And I don't know if they actually take stuff out to, other non-recyclable things out, but certainly there's a bigger sense of we've got to use this stuff, machinery and everything else, and keep using it and keep mending it and put it way beyond the life of our average washing machine or dishwasher or freezer or whatever is our comfort factor. Still have dishwashers, freezers and stuff there, but they'll be reused. People like Jonathan have got skills to strip those things down, put new components in. They're always getting new components into things and just making it happen again. Yeah.
Our time's gone. Andy, thank you so much for coming. Okay, bless you. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you very much. I think my overall impression is how different Kako is from Cheam. And some of you know that Margaret and I had the privilege of working in Africa, traveled all over the place, etc. But I think it's fairly unique. Though I did go to Ketchikan and see the salmon. I've been to Alaska, just the southern end. Haven't been to Kako. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your faithfulness in this work. And Andy and I have been good friends. And before we went to Africa again this year, we sat in Nonsuch Park. Andy and I had a coffee, and he prayed that we would find Christ on every bend in the road. And that was true for us, and sometime we may take this opportunity to tell more of our story of what happened to us, but that's been our story, that Christ has been there at every bend in the road. Let me just pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that we've heard today, and we pray that as Christian people we will have a wide horizon and understanding of the work of God, your work around the world, in places that we perhaps have never heard of and may never see. And so we give thanks for the ministry of that retreat centre, for Andy and Karen's commitment to it, and we ask your blessing upon them and for our